Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Leaders of Inclusive Childcare podcast series brought to you by CanAssist at the University of Victoria and the Ministry of Education and Childcare of British Columbia. My name is Alicia Garcia, and I am your host for this series. We are recording today on Lekwungen territory, and I would like to acknowledge that Lekwungen and WSÁNEĆ peoples have cared for this land since time immemorial, and I am very grateful to be an uninvited guest here. As you listen to today's podcast, I do encourage you to consider the territories in which you live, work, and play, and consider how we can commit to truth and reconciliation in our work with children, staff, families, and community. Today's topic is sustainable leadership in childcare, and our special guest today is Raymond Cauchi. Raymond, before we get into our topic, would you mind sharing a bit about yourself?
Yes, of course. So where to begin? Such a complicated question, which I really despise. So yeah, I've passed as a cisgendered male, uh, brown person, which is fine. I'm older than most, younger than some. Parent. Yeah, I guess I've been educating people for almost all of my adult career in various venues, and now I have a piece as a kind of a consultant around change and institutional transformation. So that's who I am today for you guys.
Great, thank you. So I know that you've done some work with Jordan's Principle. Would you mind giving our audience just a brief summary of what Jordan's Principle is and how leaders can incorporate it into their work?
Okay, that's a good, solid question. And I'm going to give you a short answer because it's a complicated response. So the short answer is Jordan's Principle is a legal ruling. So it's not legislation, right? It's a court order. And that has deep implications. One of the implications is that Jordan's Principle is going to be around for a long time, right? Because until, the Supreme Court of Canada and the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal decide it's done, it's not done, right? The purpose of Jordan's Principle is to allow Indigenous children throughout Canada to get equitable access to resources that they need without the issue of jurisdiction. And so that issue is, as we all know, there's at least 3, if not more, levels of government that can pay for something in Canada: municipal, provincial, and federal. And they theoretically all work together. They theoretically all have defined rules about what they should and shouldn't do, right? And I'm going to be solid in the sense that if you are working with children, then the idea of children suffering is a no, and not a possibility. It's not acceptable. So that's kind of what the fundamental purpose of Jordan's Principle is about. People will argue about how it gets operationalized. People will argue about what's the right way, the wrong way to do it. But that really has zero impact on the person facilitating a Jordan's Principle request and the person or the families receiving assistance from Jordan's Principle, right? So that's the short answer.
When you talk about a Jordan's Principles request, can you give an example of what that might look like?
No.
Okay.
And I say it that way because the moment I give an example, that will limit people as to what they think can be requested. But one of the fundamental aspects about a Jordan's Principle request is the simple belief that if there is a need, there is a request, right? So I will give you my favorite example of what I thought was a really outrageous need. But then it was explained to me as I was sharing this outrageous need that no, that's a possible need, and in the context. So when I first started working with Jordan's Principle, I made the joke in front of my federal government compatriots that a hot tub could be a Jordan's Principle request, right? And everyone cringed at the table and are like, haha, right? And then a physiotherapist talked to me 3 days later and said, actually, no, there's a lot of physiotherapy that is facilitated by hot water. So this physiotherapist literally said to me, I could write a letter specifically recommending the need for a hot tub for medical purposes. And I'm like, damn, right? I didn't know that was possible. So I'm going to keep my mouth shut, or I'm just going to keep making what I think are outrageous things. I am not the all-knowing person who fully understands what people's needs are and how they can be met. That's not who I am. And so that was a really humbling moment, right?
What is your response to people whose first instinct is to kind of scoff at the idea that a request is not really a need?
My first response is check your privilege. It's just that straightforward, right? Just because you have enough privilege to not see that as a need, that's a you thing. 100%, right? And I guarantee that if someone is brave enough or scared enough to make a Jordan's principle request and to come forward and say, I need something, they definitely do not have that privilege,
Right.
right? Or that set of privileges that you currently share. That goes into the whole piece about empathy and sympathy and et cetera, et cetera. So my first response when someone says, oh, that's not a legitimate request or that's ridiculous, why would anyone need that? Check the privilege.
That's excellent. I think that kind of leads me into the next question, which is kind of talking about how we train staff on understanding Jordan's principle and maybe what your advice would be on training staff. What are the ways that we can incorporate that into our daily programming?
Okay, so one of the things that I would really say about Jordan's principle is that we have to, as staff, you have to let go of the outcome, right? You cannot expect there to be an outcome. And that's rough. Okay, right? Having done frontline work for many years, having walked alongside people and suffered with them and cried with them, the idea that I have no control over this outcome, that I will do my best to do everything that the federal government requires of me, that I will support this child and this family in my most committed capacity. And then in the end, I have nothing to do with it, right? So I don't get to control the outcome. Fundamentally, the federal government chooses, right? I have many strong opinions about what the federal government should and should not do, but those are my personal opinions, right? And they have no bearing on what the government actually does. So you have to let go of that expectation because to be disappointed or to even be ecstatic could potentially harm you in the long run, right? Like when we talk about stress or when we talk about self-care, when I do other types of education or even just like personal coaching, I want to be clear that, the expectation and the disappointment of that expectation is practically just as injurious as not having it at all. So that's an interesting thing. So I would say that like really kind of focus or remember the fact that you don't control the outcome. On the flip side of that, I would also recommend that people be trained to let go of their own expectations about what should or should not be requested. And whatever that parent, and then by extension, that professional needs, just do your best to be part of the successful team, right? To help facilitate, to not act as a gatekeeper, but a gate breaker. Because even if you are trying to attempt to access Jordan's principle, which will be a long time, you're still focused on finding alternatives to Jordan's principle. Because I will be having had multiple discussions with various parties, Jordan's principle was never meant to be the first answer, right? It has always been designed and intended to be the final and only response in that sense, right? So one of the arguments the federal government will use around Jordan's principle is, did you do everything you could have before coming to us?
Yeah. And I really appreciate actually too that you were talking about that self-care piece and really honing in on your emotions and your ties to it. And I wondered if you have any advice for leaders, when there are so many things out of our control, how do you manage self-care in such a high stress environment and a high stress workload?
In various points of my career, I've been in positions of leadership where I've led small groups or large groups, whatever you want to call them. As a leader, right? If the question was, how do I help maintain that sustainability, that kind of self-care thing? So, okay, I would say two things because I don't like saying lots of things, but two things. One, genuinely mean it when you say you care about self-care, right? If you're in an organization and you say, oh yeah, we value the fact that we want to give time to our employees or our team members to do self-care, mean it. Like, and not just mean it in the sense of, oh yeah, but build policy for it, right? Build it into the way you do your work so that when people want to argue about it, you can be like, no, the policy says this person gets 3 days off because they've just had a sad puppy experience or whatever it happens to be that they need self-care for, right? Okay. And the other thing, the companion to that is you build it into your policy, like make it explicit that this is how we do business here, but also don't judge it, right? When one of your team says to you, and you need to build a culture, again, put it in policy if you must, where your team should feel safe enough to come to you and be like, I've had a really rough morning. so-and-so yelled at me, you know, I have some stuff going on that I don't want to talk about. I need 30 minutes to sit in a closet because that's what I need. Right? Do it. Don't judge it. Don't ask questions about it. Right? Like, like think about with your friends, right? When your friends come to you and they say they need support, you don't judge their support. Well, you shouldn't. You don't do it. Right? Right? You literally just say, "What can I do?" Right? What should I not do? Whatever, right? Do you just need me to stand here and yell at the universe with you? Right? That's how it should be, right? Because there's so much cultural bias against self-care in every profession. Like there's this weird garbagey mystique that you have to be tough, you have to be strong, that tears shall not fall from your eyes onto your cheeks. I have cried so many times for the most ridiculous things because they were deeply
Yep.
emotionally impactful and because I was so tired, so drained. It should be okay to do that, right? Simple, right?
Yeah, no, I really like that. And I think that it's really important too that you mentioned asking what people need, because I think a lot of times we put the pressure on ourselves to know everything. And so when someone comes in and they're experiencing kind of a rough time, we can just ask them what they need. We don't need to be expected to know exactly
Oh,
what they need at the time.
no, no. I've been wrong so many times. And then there's apologies. So yeah, that's a whole other topic for me. It really is. Yeah, so help remind staff that the outcome is not in their hands when it comes to Jordan's principle. It's a good life lesson. There's so many things that are not in your hands, not in control, that you don't have control.
Right.
Right. And then the other thing, right, if we're talking about managing Jordan's principle and then leading into, sustainability is not judging people when they need help, when they come to you in a vulnerable and hopeful way. Because that's what people forget, I think, is that when someone comes to you to ask for help, they are extremely vulnerable, but they are extremely hopeful. They genuinely believe that you can help them.
Right. Exactly. And they're
Like
trusting you. They're putting their trust in you.
100%, right? So please don't betray that, right?
Right.
Right. And another thing is if you don't support this idea of self-care, be 100% explicit about that. Be like, we just don't have the time. We don't, I've never seen that in an organ, but I would be, I would be amazed and almost in awe if they were that honest. If they were like, I know that you're looking for work here, and I know that everyone else says we care, we want self-care to occur, but we just can't do it. We don't have the capacity. This is a high stress, right? So, for example, I'm going to jump all over like emergency rooms. Okay. Like I have a lot of sympathy for medical care workers because they in my from my perspective they are a profession that wants to really do self-care, but we as a culture do not give them permission to do it. We have too high expectations.
No, it is true. And I think when we talk about self-care too, when we've gone out in community and talked about it, a lot of times the response is, I don't have time for self-care. I
Yep.
am, I have a full program right now. We don't have enough time. I don't have a time to myself to even use the bathroom. I don't know when I'm going to do this. And then I go home and I have children of my own. When in the world am I going to have time to do self-care? And so, when we talk about sustainability and leadership, we're talking about preventing that burnout and
Yep.
making sure that we have job retention. And I think, self-care is a huge piece of that. So I think when we talk about, building sustainable workforce, self-care needs to be a priority. So, as we talk about sustainability in leadership in childcare, we were talking about how some barriers to that may be a lack of time.
Mm.
Maybe some people don't value self care. What are some other barriers to this sustainability in leadership in childcare?
Performance expectation. Right. So you touched on it, this idea that you always have to be working 100% of the time, right? Nothing like that exists in nature. Like, I'm always shocked when I do reviews or when I get reviewed and someone says, "Do you give 100% of your effort all the time when you're at work?" I'm like, I can't even give 100% of my effort for like 2 hours sometimes. Come on, right? Like, so that expectation alone, right? And then so okay, here's why is this complicated for me? Okay, so I fundamentally believe that everyone's a decent human being, right? Everyone wants to do the right thing. Everyone wants to do what they said they were going to do, and no one wants to be a thief or however you want to language that. No one wants that, right? You want to be a good human. So when you come into a situation and the expectation by someone you that has authority over you, right? Or when you have authority over someone and you have the expectation, you have to be on 100% of the time. You have to be your best 100% of the time. And if not your best, then you have to be striving to be your best 100% of the time, right? I firmly believe that every human wants to do it, right? We genuinely have the need to do what is expected of us because we've agreed to do it, right? So that's a barrier because at some point, you're going to fail. How do you manage that failure? It's going to be a crisis. Worst case scenario, you make a mistake that actually physically harms someone in the long term because you're tired, because you're burnt out, because you didn't make the right critical decision, because you're so busy trying to be best. What I sometimes think good enough should be our expectation. Like, so for example, if you look at a sports performer, a top-notch sports performer, right? When you talk to them, they're like, yeah, when I'm on the field or when I'm skiing, I am at my best. Every other time, not even close. I'm resting, I'm chilling, I'm practicing, I'm pretending to be my best so that I can achieve that 100% total focus in one moment. So if we could get rid of that performance barrier, I would be happy.
That would be great.
Just good enough.
I think that is exactly right. And I think everything that we're talking about here too, with performance and self-care and finding time, these are all ways to model for staff to do the same things for themselves, and even trickles down to the kids when we talk about self-care and, asking questions even to see what people need. We can do that same thing for kiddos. And so I think there are quite a lot of barriers right now as far as sustainability is concerned. But I think that the more that we model and the more that we're there to support each other, that's where we will find that sustainability. Did you have anything else you wanted to add as far as barriers to sustainability?
I do. So again, when we think about the culture that we grew up in, right? There is a definite performance culture in the sense of, you have to do your best. I'm going to adopt a purely utilitarian mindset when it comes to management. Okay. So I'm the manager of this team and I say, oh yeah, that team member, I recognize it. I know what burnout looks like. That they're on the edge. They are doing their best to come to work, but they are on the edge, right? If I keep pushing them because I need to, right? Staffing shortages, whatever you want to say, they're going to either go ill and take time off medically or quit, or they're going to do something crazy and I'm going to have to intervene, right? I know that. I can see that coming, right? So now I have a choice. Do I accept the potential short-term benefit of forcing that person to push through, or do I have that longer vision of, if I just say stop, we shut down a couple programs if we can, we reduce facilities a bit, right? And we maintain that longer term vision and allow that person, and by extension everyone else, to kind of have a breather and retain, right? I have that choice. I can choose to do that, right? And of course, as you might guess, my leaning is to do that if I am able. So that would be it for me. Like, a barrier is this operational constraint where we have to perform as a school, as a kindergarten, whatever the center is, at the highest peak performance. You can't, right?
Right.
And so it's awfully short-sighted to force people to do that.
That makes complete sense. And I think we're talking about retaining for the long term. So you have to have the relationship with your staff in order to kind of be able to read them and see, I can tell they're about to burn out or they are already burnt out. Thank you all for tuning into the first episode of the Leaders of Inclusive Childcare podcast series. Our next episode will be part 2 of Sustainable Leadership in Childcare with Raymond, and it will be available this Friday. Thank you for your support and take care.